listeners and even to our students online. Welcome to our post-budget forum hosted by the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. My name is Trevor Johnson, Senior Fellow at Cipriani College in the Labor Studies Department, and I will be the moderator for today's forum. The topic we are looking at today is the impact of Budget 2026 on the average citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago. And we also engage in with the impact on inside of there on focus on youth and marginalized communities. We have two panelists on set with us today. And we have, of course, well known, no stranger to the college, uh, Sister Suniti Maharaj, and of course, Comrade David Abdullah. Suniti Maharaj is the director of the Lloyd Bess Institute, and of course a former senator in the upper house, well known for her activism in several areas. And we also have with us, of course, Mr. David Abdullah. David is an economist by academic training. He has also spent 39 years at the Oilfield Workers Trade Union in the position of Chief Education and Research Officer, Executive Treasurer, and General Secretary. He is the leader of the movement for social justice, founding member and leader, and has been its political leader from 2012 to present. David has served on several state boards and other cabinet-appointed committees, and is also well known in various initiatives, the Constitution Reform Forum, the Assembly for Caribbean People, and certainly no stranger to us in any way. So welcome to both of you, Suniti, and also to David. Today, as we indicated, we'll be looking at uh, the impact of the national budget, which I know would have been delivered last month. We in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. It has been debated and passed in the lower house, and of course as well in the upper house, the Senate of Parliament. And of course, right after the budget, you would have had many observations, many analyses, etc. But what we really want to take a look at is as the fiscal measures, etc., monetary measures, etc., and government policy that has been rolled out in the budget. We really want to begin to see how it's impacting the lives of the average citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. As an example, just last week or in the past few weeks, we have had students graduating from the University of the West Indies, from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, from Roy Tech, from right here at Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. We had a graduation on Friday, and over 400 students graduated. And the majority of these persons, some of them may already be in the world of work, but certainly quite a lot of them, as a result of their having received their degrees or whatever certification, they are now trending towards the world of work. And what can they expect as they begin to transition from their studies? What is there for them? So I want to begin by inviting both of you perhaps to share an opening perspective. I would start with Suniti and then move on to David. Your, free flow
Yeah.
of what your observations are about the budget. We would have had, as I said, the budget presented by the Minister of Finance, Mr. Tan Ku. It's a deficit budget. I think some 59.2 billion in expenditure, with revenues expected to be in the area of 55.3 billion. So there's a 3.8 billion deficit. We have had, areas of interest, public sector reform, digital modernization. He spoke about an employment fund to replace CPEP and URP, wage negotiations with the Public Services Association, and conceivably other public sector unions. So these are just some of the measures: review of VAT, agriculture, etc. So quite a number of areas that he went into. I just thought I'd highlight a few of them, and just to give you an opportunity to begin to share your observations since the budget has been delivered and passed in Parliament.
Thanks, Trevor, and happy to join Cipriani in this discussion. When the minister read the budget, I found it to be reasonably coherent.
Yeah.
He seemed to touch all the areas of that the public would be interested in. But when you pull out from the budget, even if everything that he has there would more or less be realized, we are in such an uncertain state, I should say, in this country right now. The entire region is in that situation where you can't think, you have no idea what is going to be possible next year and what is not going to be possible. And that is a state of uncertainty that has been compounded by the U.S. aggression against Venezuela, into which we have been dragged, and also global conditions. There's a lot of uncertainty. It is really a period of fundamental change in the world, in the global economy. Insofar as there's something called a global economy, I mean, there's the death of globalization, America first, transactional economics and politics and so on is the order of the day. And even the Americans don't know. And even the American president, who is at the source of much of this, can't really say, because he is in a state of constant negotiation when he pulls back, when he presses the button and so on. And it's the fact that there is a globalized economy means that everybody is affected. So Europe is in that state of what is going to be possible, what's going to happen to Ukraine. All kinds of, sudden outbursts of anger against this country and that country. I mean, look at Brazil, the attempt to take sides with Bolsonaro. Americans are vexed with South Africa now, don't want to invite them to G20 next year. So there is this upheaval, and economics is part of what is affected. And that travels to us. We are in that world. We are part of the World Trade Organization.
Yes.
America can diss it, ignore it, break the rules, but we will be punished if we decided we're going to be Trinidad and Tobago first, right? And say this doesn't work for us, put some tariffs on that, raise whatever. If we were to do that, which one could do, but you must calculate the price. So I think this budget sits in an ocean of uncertainty, included in some very fundamental ways, which is certainly the revenue calculations. And this minister is not alone in that. Every budget for the past n number of years, the ministers of finance have come to understand that you could just change the configuration of the budget, come up with a smaller deficit than normal, appease the public, because you can always say the projected revenue is flawed, not flawed, but it was calculated an oil price and a gas price that wasn't realized because of X, Y, and Z. And then we're going to come back to the parliament, and then you're going to find out in April or May what the deficit was
Yeah.
based on actual calculations. The figures are already low. There's no oil price. There has not been one day since the budget when we came close to realizing, I think it's $73,
Yes. Yeah.
right? And it's the price is roughly around 60 if you say it's somewhere between NYMEX and Brent. And gas is also under the price. So we already know that based on this period, which is of course about 2 months, that the no, just over a month, that you haven't got the revenue. There are other things, but I think I will just let David have his say at this stage. We can pick them up as we go along.
Okay, certainly. David, welcome again.
Thanks, Trevor, and good evening to everyone who's tuned in, and thanks, Unity, for placing us in the global context, because that's where we are. So I wouldn't elaborate on what you have said. I agree 100% what you have said. I think that there are some issues. I mean, the budget was entitled this TNT first. I mean, I really don't like the use of phrases that have come out of the United States and Trump and just placing it back for us. It's the alignment.
Yes.
You could come up with something more creative than that. But it then goes on to say building economic fairness through accountable fiscal policies. So I'm going to try to look at those two things: economic fairness and then the issue of accountable fiscal policies. I want to deal with the accountable fiscal policies first. Suniti referred to one. That is that the estimated oil price of $73.25 a barrel and the estimated gas price of $4.25 US per MMBTU are not going to be realized this year. So
Yes.
therefore, the revenue estimated from the energy sector, the hydrocarbon sector, is not going to be realized.
Right.
The second thing is that when one looked, and it was Dr. Marlene Nance, who is an independent senator now, because I didn't pick it up right away, she indicated that there was estimated, because you then have to look at all of these other books, right? The
Yes.
budget books,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I didn't walk with all because there are a ton of
Yes.
them. But in this one, which is the draft estimates of revenue for the financial year, when you look at borrowing, 2024 borrowing actual was $16.1 billion. The 2025 estimates, which would have been last year, was 12.8 billion, but the revised estimates was about 10.6. And then the 2026 estimates is $18.9 billion. In other words, they've put into the revenue estimates for this year a huge amount of borrowing of 18 billion. And when you break that down, a significant part of that is actually foreign borrowing.
Yes.
So that is a matter of concern. Now, so the issue of accountable fiscal policies, which really is your revenue and so on, we have to raise some questions around that. Now, in that regard, the government is planning to get revenue. Now, they came in on a campaign that they were not going to increase electricity rates, water rates, no new taxes, right? That was a campaign promise, one of the many things that they put out. But in fact, they are imposing increases in electricity rates, not for householders, but for commercial and industrial users, of a surcharge of 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, they plan to raise $270 million from that. Now, the question is, when the electricity rates are increased for industrial, more particularly commercial users,
Yes.
which would be restaurants, supermarkets, and a whole host of firms like that, how will those business people then deal with their increased electricity rates? Now, their electricity rates may not go up by more than, I don't know, I didn't do the calculation. Let's assume 10%, their electricity rates go up by 10%, assuming that. And electricity rates for business may only be 1 or 2% of the overall costs of running the business. So they shouldn't really increase prices for consumers. So we're going to have to wait and see come January 1st, when this thing kicks in, what is going to happen to prices for consumers, and whether business people will pass on not just the actual increase in their rates, but increase plus to
Yes.
consumers, and therefore what will that do to the purchasing power of working people? Similarly, they didn't go with the property tax. They repealed that, but they then have a landlord business surcharge. And the business surcharge, because nobody really rents a business for $20,000 or less per year. That's, $1,200-$1,400 a month. That rental income is going to be much more than that.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's 3.5% of the gross annual rental income exceeding $20,000. So that's significant. So people who are renting in an apartment, a lot of people rent in an apartment or rent a
Yes.
home, as the case may be. When the surcharge hits the landlord, what is the landlord going to do in terms of trying to recover some of that cost? And what would that mean to those who have to rent? These are things that we're going to have to wait and see what happens going down the road. But they didn't say exactly how much money they're going to raise by that, simply the registration fee of 70 million, which they'll raise. So those are some areas that we need to look at. One of the other areas, of course, is the issue of, which already has hit, price of alcohol has gone up.
Yes.
And to what extent is that going to affect the hospitality sector, particularly going into Carnival? We now have other things that have come outside of the budget. So some things were not set in the budget. So you now have the issue of bans on locations for fetes and restrictions on times and so on, which were decided without any consultation. So those things are going. We have to see what are the impacts of these decisions on
You're right.
on people's incomes, businesses, and so on, particularly between now going into Carnival and into Christmas, which is a high period for that. On the other hand, people who drive cars that use super gasoline are happy because they're paying less for gas, and that's an immediate impact. So you might be saving a significant amount of money there. And of course, the 10%, which was referred to, but I don't know if it was actually formally put on the table today. It seemed to have been put, but not put last week, and so on. And therefore, obviously, whenever those negotiations are concluded, public servants will get an increase in their pay. The issue of back pay is another story. We could come back to that because I don't see that being paid at all right now. Certainly not in cash. There's just no money to pay back pay in cash. You could pay increased salaries, but not necessarily back pay in cash and so on. So we'll have to wait to see how that runs out. But what I'd like to do maybe a little later on is to then address some of the other things that have been happening, some before the budget, like the shutdown of CPEP and URP, and the people losing jobs in those areas, and other workers' contracts being ended, and then they put out this massive program of employment where people went and signed up, and I think there were over 100,000 people who signed up or something like that, but they only 20,000 jobs. And how are those 20,000 people going to be chosen? What criteria? We haven't heard what is the criteria they're going to be used. And therefore, when you look at the issue of economic fairness, we have to drill down to see exactly how fair the government's policies are going to end up being in terms of working people, young people, those who are unemployed. Something we come back to some of these issues.
So I want to pick up the point, the employment issue.
Yes.
Because when the minister announced the employment fund and unemployment fund as well, he said, but the prime minister will deal with that when she joins the budget debate. And when she was expected to join the debate, she didn't turn up. Well, I think we're still waiting to get an explanation for that. I think it has to do with some security issue. And she was unable to, not allowed to come to Parliament in her own protection. But my caveat is that nobody has said anything. This is just a little more than speculation, but it's what is being said, right? But she has spoken to Parliament since, and she has not addressed those things. Nonetheless, the people who have lost their jobs in URP and from people employed by CPEP contractors are not the same people who were applying for those jobs the
Yes.
massive
Yes.
20,000.
Yeah,
Because
massive.
those are public service jobs, government jobs in different parts of the public sector, a different level of qualifications.
Yes.
So, what is the situation of these other people who are on the margin of income? It's not as though they are the likely candidates, right?
Yes.
The other thing is that there are quite a number of reports of contract workers being let go. Let go, I shouldn't say let go. When their contract has come to an end, they are not being rehired.
Yeah.
So are these replacement jobs? Because these are in the public sector, and if you were in that job, and quite a number of people have been on short-term contracts for years. And so if you're not renewed and that job becomes available and is one of the 20,000, then it's really a replacement. Because the person who lost it, who was not renewed, is back now on the market looking for a job. So what is the net actual creation of new jobs? The other thing, though, is we are at on the cusp of technological change.
Yes.
With AI, and the government has embraced AI certainly for the schools. So this is a point at which the long delayed evaluation of the public sector employment needs and manpower requirements of the public sector ought to come first. Because what you are saying is that all of these jobs, as they are, we're going to be hiring people. But when you incorporate AI into your product, if you plan to do that, and there is a whole ministry of, that is, who has that mandate, that we know that is going to come with some job losses. It is already happening in the private sector.
Yes.
Okay. And that is going to come because you are going to get to the point, again, we're going to have to come back. We're going to come back if the government's revenue projections are not realized and the expenditure commitments are in place. There is a very good chance, and we don't get that investment grade needed for continuing to borrow at the same level of interest as before. And there are worrying signs about that right now. Then you may find yourself having to go and look for some form of bailout. I know there's a team of ministers around in the Middle East looking for some money and so on. Presumably, we're told for the construction bonanza to come. But you can, as I think the Prime Minister, when she was at the UN, she came back and said one of those countries had given her $5 million US. Grant, it seemed like to me, because they do that. They've done that with Barbados a lot. And one thing that people would have learned from me, Motley, is you go all over the world and open doors and knock, and you can come back home with some free money.
Yeah.
And that free money can be applied. I don't know if that goes into the consolidation fund or whether there's a discretion to use. I'm raising that question because
It's supposed to go to the consolidated fund.
I'm raising that question because I wonder if it's possible to source funds outside of revenue or taxation that can be used with discretion by the government in dealing with certain commitments that where we're saying they have to go to Parliament for an increase, right? That maybe you can sidestep that, right?
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we find ourselves having to knock on the doors, one of the IMF or something like that, one of the guaranteed things you're going to be told is that you have to trim your public sector. That's one of the first things. You tighten it up, and they will give you all the money to through some international agency, as we launched yesterday, an AI readiness assessment of Trinidad and Tobago. It's not the first one. The Caribbean, Jamaica has already done those. They were promoting it as the first. So these are the kinds of variables in the mix. And jobs are going to become important. And the point I want to make here, I question whether these are 20,000 new jobs.
Okay.
Or replacement jobs. And the other thing is for years we have not been able to rely on the unemployment figure. it's a challengeable figure in terms of how the data is gathered. But if you lived it, the lived reality doesn't square with the figures.
That's
Yeah.
interesting, David. Well, just on this on unemployment, I recall right here when we were well, not this team, but we were discussing I think it might have been the 2024 budget. An economist from UWI was present, and at that time in that budget, the unemployment figure was indicated by Coleman Burt as being 3.5%. But it simply didn't square, as Sunati is saying, with what we all knew as because we live in the real world. We know just about everybody. Everybody I know whose friends and their children are looking for jobs, etc., etc., and so forth. So, as you mentioned, this thing about the unemployment figure, I just plugging that in because we really need to get a much more, or it appears we need to get a much more reliable.
That's why we need the independent Institute of Statistics that was promised by the last government. I think the bill might even have been drafted.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was drafted, but there was a lot of work that had gone into it.
Yeah, I don't think any government wants an independent institution dealing with statistics, data.
Yeah, we
There was
just
the
have
National
the,
Statistical Institute is what.
Yeah,
it
the
was
national
supposed to be. Yes.
statistics, right.
So one of the issues around unemployment, and Roger Hussein, to his credit, makes this point over and over, that whereas the unemployment figure may appear to be low, the issue is that the number of people who are actually participating
Yeah.
in the labor market is very low.
yeah,
Labor force participation rate is low. In other words, the labor force is defined as those people who are either working, non-institutional population over 15 or whatever it is, and so on, who are either working or looking for work. So people who are not looking for work within a certain period of time, 6 months, whatever it is, are not counted as part of the labor force. So you could have several 100,000 people who are of employable age who are not counted as part of the labor force. Now, that is why you see so many people doing hustling on the side of the road, whether it is selling nuts or wiping windshields or trying to sell a pile of Zabaka or whatever it is might be in season at the point in time. That's all over the place. Now, they're not counted as part of the labor force, right? So, are they earning a decent income? Answer would be no. So that is one of the issues that we have to address. Now, Suniti mentioned the roadshow that Minister Jardine John, I don't know who else is with her, is going to.
Yes, Saddam Hussein and Sobers.
I see, going to the Far East, sorry, the Middle East, Dubai or wherever, to try and raise money for this revitalization plan. Now, I think they're hoping that there'll be a huge influx of foreign exchange through foreign investment for these projects. But, the country has not been presented with the plan, If you go on the website of the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, there is nothing, right? There is no document. The only thing that we have been presented with are those 4-page advertorials with
the glossy
with
images.
with artist impressions of what this thing is going to look like.
right.
But we don't know what are the details, or they probably do have it, but they haven't made those things public.
But isn't that something for consultation?
It ought to be.
Right? If you have a massive construction program of utilizing plenty land near communities, what purposes it's going to be for? You don't sit down and dream that up and say, okay, this is what we have for you. This is part of the national conversation.
Yes.
Do you want? There's some of those things that may be revenue, and somebody may get into a joint venture and say, okay, it's a hotel maybe, but a prison campus, unless you're going to privatize it, that's a cost.
Yeah.
Right? And somebody is going to build it for you, but now it needs to be run and maintained, and in building it, they're not going to put all their capital for that. That's not a business venture.
Yeah.
Right? You have to have the money for that. We come and build it if you pay us.
Yes.
And where are you putting that, and what is the land use per person? It just lacked a fundamental basis.
Which is why I come back to the theme of the budget, accountable fiscal policies. So they're not being totally transparent on what they're proposing. For example, so assuming some of the projects get off the ground, that some people get short-term employment in construction, but those things are short-lived. They're not sustainable. Construction activity is never sustainable. So the issue is going to be, where are you creating sustainable employment, and what is the type of employment that you're creating? So if you have hotels, just for argument's sake, and hospitality, those kinds of things like that, those jobs, yes, people will be happy to get a job, but those are not medium income employment. They're relatively low income employment. So the question is going to be, where are we going to develop and if you have job losses in the public sector, which is where most people who earn, some kind of relatively decent income, if you have job losses there, then where are people going to be able to get sustainable, decent work in Trinidad and Tobago? And we haven't heard what the plans are for that. And I think that is of concern. And we come to the foreign exchange issue a little later.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah,
Because that's also a call in foreign exchange construction.
big call on foreign
yes,
exchange. But I suppose they would hope that the influx of the short-term inflow of the FDI will help to bump up the foreign exchange.
Yeah, but what are
thing.
people coming to pay for, bring the investment for?
That we're not clear on. And what are the terms of the investment? In other words, if it is state land and somebody's building a hotel, is it going to be the same arrangement like the Hilton or the Hyatt?
Yeah, what the government is bringing to it is the land. So
That's right.
I have land, I'm going to make it available. You put up the building, but it's going to have to be financially feasible. These are things that are going to earn a profit for that person who is going to go into that.
Which was a challenge with Sandals in Tobago. That was the same issue, that Sandals was asking for a whole set of concessions and incentives to be able to do the thing. Yes, we'd have had tourists coming in and so on, but that was one of the concerns. What would be the terms of the FDI that is coming in?
so David, in a sense, you started to go down the road of the question I wanted to ask you, but I'll still go at it anyway because I wanted to. This was the first budget of for this new government. So one would, whilst we're looking at some of the immediate measures, but one would have expected they might use the opportunity to sort of have a sort of broad policy framework, because some people would argue, well, the government is in office for 5 years, you cannot expect everything to be done in year one. And so I just wanted to ask, have you seen any sort of, out of this budget, something that suggests a broad policy framework for sustainable living for the citizenry? How, have you saw any framing that we can say this is what the government is projecting to in the next, 3 to 5 years?
I didn't get, no, I think, I quite honestly, I didn't get that in the budget statement itself. And one of, so you made the point that both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, the budget debate got truncated. So we did not actually hear from the majority of the ministers as to what their plans are going forward for the areas under their particular portfolio responsibility. And so no, that didn't emerge. And so right after the budget, you had this rollout of the revitalization plan as a vision, yes, with all of these, how many, 100 or something projects or something like that. But I don't know that within that rollout, there was a sense of a strategic approach. I don't know if Suniti, you got that at all, of a strategic approach to our development.
Didn't Minister John contribute to the debate?
I don't remember if she did or not.
Because if she had, I mean, that the revitalization plan
should have come out then.
Yeah.
I don't think she did.
Okay.
I don't think she did.
No.
They were all, I think from the government bench, they were primarily junior ministers. I don't think any of the frontline ministers actually contributed to the budget debate.
But Suniti, what in my opening remarks, I was speaking about the opportunities or hope for young people. As I said, we have just in the past few weeks, we had quite a number of students graduating, and just over the weekend, I was told by a colleague of mine that his daughter graduated with leadership and management at UWI, and of course she's looking for a job. So I just acknowledge what he said without making any comment. I suppose he was in a sense indirectly asking me, do I know of any opportunity, because his daughter just graduated and obviously she wants to get into the job market. So that was just one conversation, but you can multiply that hundreds or thousands of times. And then, of course, you spoke earlier, and David as well mentioned the persons at the lower level, URP, CPEP, who have been let go. If a budget is supposed to provide some level of hope and sustainable living for the average citizen, what are you seeing for young persons, especially out of this budget, who either maybe have a low paying income job, but they have studied, they're looking forward to something? What do you see going forward? How is the budget? How is the government going to fulfill that expectation or hope that these young persons may have?
Yeah, well, when we hear 100,000 of them went and applied, and I don't know if it's 100,000 individuals, 100,000 applications, because many of them were applying for several different jobs, right?
Yes.
And so we're not clear on that. But I know young people who went, and it was, they're scared, you know. I don't know if the university tracks their students when they graduate in terms of where they're getting jobs, and so you can get other, or if Cipriani does that, some idea of the job market. But the job market is challenging. You look in the newspapers, if you look at the newspapers looking for ads and see what people are looking for, you don't see many ads at all. If you go on Caribbean jobs, you go on wherever else, you know. So the other option that a lot of young people have is that they would go abroad. They will, you know, apply for something in the States or wherever, and Canada. But the world is closing its doors to immigrants. And for the first time, I'm actually hearing young people talking about looking in the Caribbean. Right? They're thinking about checking Guyana and going to Barbados. You hear them, and that's a good thing, because it hasn't been, the Caribbean has not been our first port of call. It has been for maybe people doing construction. You know, there's a project here, Trinidad company got a contract, they take their workers and go and so on. And so we have to really be careful with what message we're sending our young people. And the message has to be, apply by all means, but try to figure out where you can get something that, some form of passion, follow your passion somewhere, at least be joyful in what you're doing, learn the skills, you know, get online, learn some skills, find something that has a little market, or some service you can provide to other people who can't utilize technology. Get yourself active, because the biggest danger our young people face is depression. It's that sense, I know about that because my production company, Caribbean Newsroom, we've done 2 programs so far, which are programs hosted by young people, and they brought in some of their own colleagues. And the idea for that program came out of the fact that of the 4 of them, one at a certain stage dropped out, was going to do biochem. The others have done what I would call STEM programs. Biochemistry, occupational health and safety. They've got their masters, and for years they've no job. So the point is, we have been pushing young people to do science, but we have not reconfigured the economy with all kinds of opportunities, with labs and they create product creation and so on and so forth. So they have no jobs. And I said, why don't you all bring your story and do a little program and get some of those young people as well who were part of that program for farming under Foster Cummings program. Several of them a couple of them who came and talked that they had been through the program and had not got the land, and this is before this government came into office.
Right.
So it was one of these things to appeal to young people for 2 years, and they'll get they'll have some house, land for house, land to farm and whatever. And then by the time the election came around, those who had graduated still hadn't got any work.
Right.
So the depression and loss of hope that has set in among this population, that is going to be one of our biggest challenges, and we need to set about that because that is a tinderbox.
And how do you reconcile that with the, government pushing the retirement age towards 65?
Well, you see, that is the problem. You have one problem, and you address it with a solution that creates 2 more problems, right? So they're dealing with the fact that the national insurance doesn't have the funds to pay out in due. So of course, pensions, right? Let's extend it. But what are you doing at the other end? The people who are waiting, normal attrition and retirement will bring in X number of people every year. Now you're telling the people who might have entered 5 years, wait 5 years until that's set ready to go. And so what is the problem you're creating at this end? And well, I suspect it must be voluntary, but if you leave, you have to work to 65 to get it.
Well, eventually, effectively, what this is a graduated sort of step, it appears, but eventually, and the government did announce, I'm told.
But you see, the problem comes back at both ends. The problem comes back on the failure to transform the economy. Because we have known since, I don't know, the 80s, about the need for economic transformation and transformation of the public sector in order to stimulate job creation and businesses outside of the public service. The public service we recognize was once upon a time, it was the only place people used to get a job, a steady pension, holidays, that and teaching. And so, people would make a beeline for those jobs. Police service. But that is no longer the world. And business used to be, well, either you're in big business, you're in the merchant class and you're importing everything and selling it, import it cheap and sell it there, or you have run a little parlor and so on. But the whole period of all this money that we earn from oil and gas was to carry the economy from a basic level business operation to manufacturing, to industrialization, so things that we are creating. Right now, we're going to join the ways of buying AI. What we're creating in AI? What are we adding? What inventions in the cure of cancer and this? Young people can do those things. It is individuals sitting down in their house with a computer and have the skills. Right? And so the message for our young people has to be very urgently about looking after yourself. Don't waste time. You might apply for the job, and this contact system will work for a few people. It doesn't work for everybody. Figure it out. Get yourselves into groups. Use your computer. Make connections overseas. Find what we have here that nobody else has in the world, and create something that is uniquely yours. Because you can't go there and try doing the same thing everybody is doing, right? I have seen, for example, our carnival designs that are it's into the world of fashion now. When you have all these, the Met Gala and all these things, and they're Trinidadians abroad who are into it. They are the designs. It comes from a certain kind of skill that we acquire.
Yeah.
Right? Get out there, take your steel band and go. You have no sponsor. So many bands are losing their sponsorship. 2 more today. We have to reconfigure Panorama.
Yeah, so just coming back to a couple of the points, let me come back on the NIS issue. That's a very sore point for me because I chaired the Labor and Social Security Subcommittee of Vision 2020.
Right.
And I was on the core committee of 2020. So I'm talking about 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. And we clearly identified then, so we're talking about more than 20 years, right? That's a whole generation.
Yes.
and a bit. We clearly identified that the population was beginning to age and that this was going to catch up with us at some point in time or the other. I then came up with the idea that the government, which the committee agreed, and we put it forward in an interim report. We never did a final report, but the interim report, that was a period of the gas windfall, huge amounts of revenue. Our revenues tripled, GDP tripled in that period. That some of that gas windfall should have been used by the government to create a fund for old age pensions, because at some point in time, government's fiscal situation, revenue and expenditure is not going to be able to sustain old age pensions, because old age pensions is a huge, huge amount annually that comes out, right? And that therefore, if we created an old age pension fund that was invested like the NIS and whatever over a period of time, it would have eliminated recurrent expenditure, but it could have reduced it very significantly. And secondly, that there should have been an aggressive move to have everyone who is self-employed into the NIS net, because a lot of people who are self-employed and don't pay NIS, but when they retire or they can't work, they then depend on old age pension.
Old age pension.
So that then pushes up your old age pension costs and so on. Whereas if you had more people contributing to NIS, we would do two things. One, it will reduce the dependence on old age pension later on and government recurrent expenditure. And secondly, the pool of monies going into the NIS would have been increased. And had that happened 20-something years ago, the NIS, in my view, I'm not an actuary, but in my view, would not, and we had actuaries on the committee, incidentally, at least one, the NIS would not be in such a precarious state as it is today. So it's a very painful issue for me, because it comes back to failure of governments taking action when we had the resources. The government could have put $1 billion every year for 6-7 years when we had our gas boom or more into an old age pension fund. And today we'd have been a much better and healthier fiscal situation. But so there's an absence of vision. I remember Dennis Pantin, our friend Suniti Dennis, organized a workshop or seminar, whatever it was called. It was at Crown Plaza, I think it was called at the time,
Yes.
on the issue of industrial policy, because Dennis was very strong on industrial policy. And of course, most of the economists at the time were rejecting that, because industrial policy was no longer it. It was a total neoliberal model, and the private sector to drive everything, and so on and so on. Funny enough, now industrial policy is coming back globally. But had we had industrial policy saying these are the sectors, creative sector, whatever it is that we want to focus on, then your education streams, how you organize, what you encourage people to study, would then be linked to what your economic plan is. So therefore, instead of having a lot of people doing, well, my daughters are lawyers, but say doing law, just for argument's sake, right? Some of them should have been doing something else that would have fit your plan that would come up through your industrial policy. But there's been a complete separation between the individual students who want to pursue something in university and the offerings of the university and what the economy is, because the economy is not organized in such a way that would create it. So that's another major problem. Just to come back, for example, to the government's revitalization program. 15 or more years ago, when I was president of FITA, and I was working with the Council of Community Organized, East Port of Spain Council of Community Organizations. And I said to them, you know what, let's come up with a development plan for East Port of Spain.
Yes.
And let us think of it as a heritage city in the same way that old Havana, old San Juan.
Yes. Yes.
Because there's so much in East Port of Spain, right? That people will want to visit and to see, and so on, both in terms of our own citizens and in terms of people who might be visiting. And we came up with a tremendous plan and presented it. Of course, nothing happened. So when And that was to counter what the Manning government was planning at the time, which was to tear down all the plannings on George Street, Duncan Street, and so on,
Yes.
and gentrify the place with some fancy building. Remember that? And
Post
people,
Shanghai.
that's right.
He
And so
wanted to create a
Shanghai.
Shanghai.
Okay, I can't remember where it
Shanghai,
went.
Shanghai model.
Right. So that was a counter to that, right? So we again beginning to discuss that to counter the government's revitalization plan, because they want to move people out of sea lots to put an industrial estate. But then people in sea lots have invested time and energy and money to create their homes and a community. You can't just move people out.
That's the point I was making about consultation.
Yes.
This is why anyone who wants to say that this just sounds as something created over a weekend with the pretty pictures, a VAPS, you're entitled to say that, because you are hearing nothing that would suggest that there have been feasibility studies, consultation, costing, any of those things that would normally be the foundation on which such a plan is built.
Exactly. Yeah. Agreed. So, so these are things, in other words, we all agree that the country is in a difficult place. And the government, Minister of Finance, would have been in a predicament in terms of the budget and so on. And this is now where leadership with a certain vision has to arise. If it doesn't, then we're in trouble. Has to arise to address these things. I mean, Forex is one of the things that's been talked about as an economic problem all the time, right? But I was in a high-level discussion not too long ago to looking at the Forex situation. And, and there really is, I mean, you could tinker here and there with an interest rate and things like that. That's not going to, or try to look at how you allocate a little bit better and so on. That's not solving the problem. Forex problem is not going to be solved unless we earn more foreign exchange and we stop building malls. I mean, I don't know when last you went down Balmain side, Sunity.
I passed through there. Everybody has a business.
If you see the new, every day you pass Chaguanas, another mall is going up. I don't know how many there are from Heartland to Brentwood. To Brentwood.
Extra mall.
Extra Foods, Pennywise. There's another one next to that. And then you get, quite apart from what is on the western side with Price Plaza, not Price Plaza, you have Price Plaza, and then you have Brentwood. There's another one going up next to Brentwood, Yeah. So, and then you have in the east.
So what does the business community know that we don't know about foreign exchange?
Well, unless some of that construction and businesses that are established but don't seem to be selling anything is part of the laundering of money. I'm not suggesting that the names I call are involved in that.
Yes.
Before I get on the actual protocol letter.
Yes.
Responsibility. Some of the real estate development in this country is about money laundering.
Yeah.
It's about that.
It's,
where are some people going to put their money?
Yeah.
Well, I think the foreign exchange situation is an opportunity. Again, talking to those young people.
Yeah.
I think there should be some form of, if I were to discriminate, I would say there must be some incentive for people who are actually earning foreign exchange.
Yes.
Right? Because you're consuming, at least you're earning. And therefore, for the young person who's looking for a job, I'm going to think, what service can I offer? Or what product can I offer that I could sell online? Right? And which is the market that is interested in that? Okay. So, and this is where the cultural industries come.
Of course.
You can't be trying to sell snow to the Eskimos. It's sunshine you want to give them.
Yeah.
Right? And in that case, the focus that small, micro, small, medium enterprise sector, where these young people can come, or one person can come with an idea, with a computer, and start a little something. That is, to me, the engine room that we need to really get revved up and going. Because instead of a person depending on and looking for a job, are creating a job. And I want you to create it where you can earn some foreign exchange. And I think what we have, and I think I raised this recently at sometimes. Small business in this country it's across all kinds of industries. A piece here. The Ministry of Trade has some little thing for small business. All the registrations and so on is in Ministry of Legal Affairs. You have the Ministry of Finance has, overall for everything. Some is in community development, whatever. What we need is one ministry focused on that sector that is populated by people who understand that sector and who people, managers and a whole culture that is welcoming to a community of people who are intimidated by bureaucracy, who does not trust bureaucracy because they believe if I put my idea here, somebody's going to steal it and they give their friend and whatever. Something that makes people feel they can walk off the street and go with all their lack of the innocence about systems and application and grant funding and business, how you set up a business where it's one-stop shop for small business. And all these young people and all the women who at home and want to work, want to have something where they could be at home and they can have the freedom to work as well. That is the kind of place you need. But the bureaucracy, this bureaucracy that we have is a colonial setup. Or what is the Ministry of Finance? Ministry of Finance can handle these people. When they bring laws to the parliament and they to comply with FATCA and so on, they always put in their non-profits and small business, and the ministry does not know how to cope with them. And they usually will say, because people will get up and say, well, this is a very difficult ask of the non-profit sector and small business because their governance capabilities are so weak. Many people don't know how to deal with the forms, whatever. And then they'll say, well, we'll just give them some extra time because they really don't understand them either. And it's really about big business. So we need to pull all these people together and have it as a sensitive, relevant, and open place where you can go and really get help and get past, because the people who are getting all these grants and so on are the people who are professionals at it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another element of the small and micro enterprises, because there are, I've gone to all a lot of trade fairs, TIC, and then Emancipation Support Committee, where Emancipation Day, they have a fair, and then you see the pop-up markets going to be around Christmas time. So there are a lot of people who are doing things in terms of small scale manufacture, production.
And they hit the ceiling very low though.
Yes, but so there are two aspects of that, right? One is, and so we've advocated a major buy local campaign. The minister did speak about that and so on, and then the Minister of Trade did announce that something is coming. So we have to wait and see what that is. But what that means, for example, is that supermarkets should not be selling imported alcohol, right, in the quantities that they do. And let us this Christmas stock up on local wines and other local beverages, which are there in significant enough numbers. So, you almost have, the private sector will have to say, listen, okay, this is what we are also going to do. The masses of this world and whoever Extra Foods and all them say, okay, we are going to be focusing on purchasing and selling local products. You have to, you almost have to force it on. You can't legislate it, but you have to get those people to sit down and say, yes, this is what we're going to do, because the forex situation is a crisis. And then if our small producers get that opportunity to fill out the local market, they will then be able to begin to have the capacity to export, because that is one of the issues about how you move. And all developed countries have always moved from home market, satisfying that, creating capacity, creating capital, creating expertise, and then moving into exports.
Okay, well, David, I take a totally different perspective on that. I say, let Marcy and them buy what they want to put in the supermarket. The single largest buyer of goods is the government. Look at what the government sells. The government buys food for all patients in hospitals, all prisoners in the jails, all the policemen, the army, schools, and the government is always having workshops and conferences, and all of them have, receptions and so on. The government could say, you do what you want. The government is establishing a policy local content policy, and they are the ones saying on every dollar spent for food by the government, put a figure, 80%, 50%, whatever percent has to be on local purchase.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because it's a massive amount of money they spend on food. Why are they getting away eating all that foreign stuff? All the llama and the whatever they're importing from abroad and all the wine and the whatever. No, because you see, they can exercise power over their purchase. They don't have to tell, oh, private sector only want to do that. But the government is committed. We are the local content. And let the Prime Minister open her fridge and say, come and see what I am doing in my house. I am only buying local. All the ministers, set a leadership tone and spend your money on local. So when all these Christmas gifts the government will give all about the place, look for the people who making, those small cottage industry people, buy the candles from them, buy the wrapping, buy the whatever the style, put the artists to work, and so much they're going to be spending for Christmas. Let them do some of the bags and things.
Look, there's always the debate, and you can speak to that buying local is also expensive.
No.
Well, so
because when you buy local, it is not just, I'm talking about government expenditure.
Yeah.
When you buy local, that is also your investment in that person's business. Right? When we buy the stuff from China,
Yeah.
let ordinary people make a decision and say, okay, that one is cheaper than this and I will buy the cheaper one. But the government, instead of taking money and putting in all kinds of programs that don't fructify, they can pay the little extra for what you're doing or what somebody else is doing, because that's their hard investment in your business. Because if I say to you, like the school feeding program, right, that you're a farmer, yeah, I know I can get cheaper chicken from whatever Tyson's or so if I import that, but you have a chicken farm. I'm buying chicken from you, and I'm giving you a contract for 200 chicken whatever pieces or whatever, because that's small business, right? Plenty of people going to get contracts for a small amount. I give you a contract. Once I give you a contract for that, you have a contract from the government. That's what everybody wants, a contract from the government. I could go to the bank and I have a contract from the government. I could take a little loan and buy the refrigerator. I could store my tomatoes and make, I could get into refrigeration. I could even start to get a little processor. So I'm saying that is the investment. But we are letting government off the hook all the time. And the government is the largest consumer of foreign exchange, not just to pay loans, but how are they spending? So government just seems to be this body that can tell us what to do. But who is looking at government expenditure? I want to know that the government has gone through its purchasing program, and they have looked at what they're spending, how much foreign exchange they're consuming. And I'm sure it's more than everybody else. There are important things to spend on, like maybe medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, and so on. Although industrialization requires taking some of these things we have and our cells processing and turning into medication. But they are getting away all the time because they are blaming the public all the time. You're spending you're buying online and 7% tax, Mr. Imbert. Nobody asked Mr. Imbert what is he spending on as a Minister of Finance. Where did we mash up the garment factory, mash up the furniture factory? If government was buying, and even if it's a little more expensive, that is investment. And after a time, people's businesses will grow and they will wean themselves off the government contract. Because what you carry a company that with is why the government is buying your product and you are growing. You're pushing on the outside for export to take those same furniture and whatever fashions or whatever and take it out there. And you win them off it.
I think that's be both and though. That's be both and. Because
well, yes, both hand, but I'm saying it will never happen if we say don't manage the private sector, because the private sector will have to compete now. And when you change the taste, the consumption part, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, we have never had leadership for buy local that says from the top down, we choose.
Yeah. So I'll give you a concrete example. Trevor may not have been around that time, but when Frighton used to have a Christmas dinner, right? Mm-hmm. Total local. Mm-hmm. right? So there was no alcohol that was not locally made,
Local,
Mhm.
yes.
right? So there was beer, of course, and there was rum, of course, and there were local wines and so on, but everything was local. And all the food, so we bought from our own farmers, who are members of Phyton, so the farmers up in Waterfield who are pig farmers, we bought the pork from them and so on and so on. And we bought the goat from Shiraz and his people. And so it was really a total local and ground provision and that kind of thing. And people had a wonderful time. And we deliberately said total local.
Yeah, and that is on your scale. Imagine
Yeah,
a
small
government.
scale. Exactly, but the point that we was trying to set it because we were focusing on the issue of agriculture and other things like that, and the importance of supporting our local farmers. That was one of the reasons why we went that way, to show the example that it can be done. So yes, I agree that the government has you have a function. Government have functions, and they will be serving
All the time, they're
imported
spending
stuff.
food, they're spending food money on food. Like I say, every hospital,
Yeah.
every patient, doctors, the jail, the police, and the ton of conferences and workshops. And when you add that up, I made an attempt to add it up, and I got for 1 year $1 billion, right? And I'm sure I didn't capture everything, but it's also about leadership, about the people, the ruling class, the elite class saying we choose
Yeah.
local.
Yeah, and this is why I also had the local private sector, because they're not changing their model.
But they will change their model when they see that is what government buying,
Well, I
right?
suppose, yeah, but you also have to say to them, because I remember our good friend Gregory Maguire.
Yeah, he did a punchakram.
Yes, and he couldn't get it into Massey.
But don't forget,
And then,
yes, but
and he eventually got it in because he talked to somebody, and then sometime after that he got bumped out of there.
okay, but
So-
he didn't get into Massey. But what if this Christmas the government said we are serving punchakram? Everybody have the dinners, and the ministry has this ministry, and we are buying local punchakram.
Yeah.
Gregory ain't gonna be able to supply the whole government. He will be one of those people, and another person, and the contract goes to them.
Yes, and so that's agreed. So that's at one level, but I don't think we should take away from sections of the local private sector that are simply about the consumption of foreign exchange, and doing, some of them are, but very few are doing, of the really big ones, are doing things about research and development, for example, which is another area. In countries, whether it's Japan or the United States and so on, local private sector invests in R&D in the universities, right? And when the products come out, they capitalize on it, of course, because their economic model, they capitalize on it by commercializing the products. How much is spent by our companies on research and development in this country? Because we have the old model. The oil companies never spend money on R&D here. It was all the R&D was taking place in Houston and wherever else the companies were. We never did that. So the commercial companies don't see the importance of investing in R&D. And so we had companies that were involved in local production. Citrus growers disappeared. Coconut growers, where have they gone?
But I'm
So-
saying that if they haven't been doing it, every time you raise it, they don't do it. In fact, they undermine it, and they undermine it with the complete complicity of the consumer, who say, I want my foreign thing, I'm not going to drink that wine, that, what a Pomme Cité wine, I want one from France and whatever. So I say, well, go ahead. Let them do that. But if you establish where the private sector will hustle to wherever the money is flowing from, they want a government contract too, right? And they will follow the money. And that, I don't think that has been tried. And so I will argue it. I have 3 conditions I feel should be attached to every dollar spent by the government. These are things that need to change. One is, what percentage is going to local content for everything, not just food, fashion, clothes, all them clothes that the doctors and everybody wearing, and prisons and so on. I want local people to design them and have a garment industry here. The other thing is healthy. There must be interesting ways in which everything from early childhood education, food, that where the government spends, we have a massive NCD crisis in this country. We are spending more and more money on trying to treat diabetes, heart conditions,
Hypertension.
yes, hypertension and cancer. And all I can see is that figure is just going to grow every year and every year and every year when we're supposed to be spending on preventative and on consumption patterns that are healthier. And it's hard to change people's consumption patterns later in life. And they have to get sick. The doctor have to say, don't do this, and even then they don't listen. You change it from early childhood education, and we give school feeding programs, food to those. So the government has an entry point, and the entry point is to say, okay, how can we make the little carrot and thing that we want them to eat in a very, make little animal shapes and the kind of things that you do with little children to get them to eat, right? Instead of saying, oh, my child only wants chips, right? You make it interesting, and you challenge your people who are trained, your chefs and so on, and bring them into that program. And that's how you create jobs. Because we have the current children, the children who are 3 years old now, we have to say when that child becomes up at age 30, which is a generation, that child is not going to get any of those diseases because we put them on a lifestyle track from small. And the other thing also have been eco-friendly. That all the plastics and all the kinds of things that are damaging to the environment, not just food things, but the chemicals and so on and so forth. We have to protect the environment. So that's where leadership can show. How the government spends, we have to take into consideration the biggest challenges. So local content deals with foreign exchange, and it also deals with the development of the small business sector, because the small business, they want to go to medium, and then after medium, they want to go to big. You don't just have forever, you have small business forever, right? The other thing has to be health, a healthier nation, and the other thing has to be a healthier environment.
We have about maybe 10 more minutes today. I just want to touch on at least two key things. David, negotiations, it came up a little bit earlier, and I'm not here necessarily, it's included, but the PSA and the 10%. I'm more looking at, even if those negotiations are settled, we're talking 2014 to 2019. And therefore, by the end of this year, which is just over a month away, they'll be back at two negotiating periods back. And so I'm kind of piggybacking on your experience as a trade unionist as well, because I don't know if it is, we seem to be comfortable, both employer and union, in our jurisdiction, where we don't seem to have a problem once there's something mentioned back pay. But we also back through, I mean, there's 2025 and public servants are on 2013 salaries. I was just looking today at some news coming out of Antigua, the Antigua and Barbuda PSA, the equivalent of their PSA settled with the government 2018 to 2023. So so there's still that 2 years back. But listen to just quickly a couple of the comments from the workers. How can workers plan their lives when contracts are signed 2 years after they expire? This is not just delay, it's dysfunction. Another comment quickly. The union has every right to demand real-time negotiations. Backdated contracts undermine trust and leave workers playing catch-up instead of moving forward. The final comment. This highlights a wider issue across the public sector agreements that are only effective when implemented on time, not treated as paperwork to tidy up years later. The observation and point I'm getting to is that, simply speaking, as I said, even if the public services is settled, it's still immediately, it's not one but two negotiating periods back. And it seems as if that is a sort of like in perpetuity continues. So I just wanted to get your perspective from a former trade unionist. What exactly and what needs to be done for that gap to be closed?
Yeah, it was never as bad as that, you know.
Yeah.
So if you go, many times you might be behind one collective agreement, but never 2 and 3 and 4 So I mean, right now it's 4, right?
Yes.
It's the 2 that the 10% has been offered for, and then another 2 going forward. So it's 4, that's 12 years. And so you really have to blame the last government for failing to come to grips with that immediately and finding a way of resolving it. I'm not going to say whether there should be a wage offer. And therefore, the tripartite process, which was set up, National Tripartite Advisory Council or
Council.
Committee or whatever it was called, in 2016, that collapsed, right? And I remember at the level of the Economic Development Advisory Board, I was asked to, make some suggestions about what the EDAB would advise the NTAC to do. This was before it had actually become functional, but the announcement had been made about the NTAC. And so I came up with a framework. I hadn't even discussed it. I was still in the union. Yes, I hadn't retired yet. I hadn't even discussed it with my union colleagues. I just thought I would do it my own individual understanding. And it was adopted as a formal position of the EDAB and sent on as a direct memorandum to the Prime Minister. And zilch came out of it. What we had recommended, what I had come up with, and it was tweets, I think, I can't remember the details, but what I had essentially come up with is that the NTAC should not be dealing with matters of labor law reform. That could be done separately because there are other processes to discuss labor law reform. You don't need to have the NTAC dealing with matters like that. That what the NTAC should focus on was the situation of the economy. And therefore, Minister of Finance come and give, it should be chaired by the Prime Minister, that's what the recommendation was. Minister of Finance should make a presentation about his understanding of the state of the economy. Business should do the same, what is their understanding, and trade unions, labor should do the same, what is their understanding, because different people coming from it from a different perspective. And then even if there's no unity, but at least there'll be an understanding of what the real state of the economy was in early 2016. And then second set of discussion, so that will just take a couple of weeks, would be everybody now coming to the table. What are we going to be able to do to address 3 or 4 key things? Foreign exchange, because that was 2016, right? We're now 10 years down the road and the situation is worse. Foreign exchange, sustainable employment, and the third one was the government's fiscal crisis. What are the 3 things to deal with that? Now, if you therefore had a focused discussion and business would say, okay, these are the things we're going to do for exchange. Government would say these are the things and whatever labor. And then you could then arrive in a tripartite way of a clear plan of action to deal with those 3 critical matters in a tripartite way. And if that had been done, then one of the elements of that would be how do we resolve the issue of negotiations that are there. That was 2016. So that would have been one negotiating period that could have been resolved in that way. Yes? The unions may have said, just for argument's sake, I'm not saying they would have said it, unions may have said, well, listen, we have a negotiating period now. We recognize, given all the discussions, that the situation is bad. So this is what we prepare to accept. Yes? And the government would say, okay, well, we might be able to match you with that, but this is what we could manage. And those things could have been dealt with in that kind of collaborative way. But that was not how the tripartite advisory council was functioning, and so it collapsed. It was bound to collapse, because the government then started retrenching people and whatever, and the whole thing collapsed. So the issue now for the government would be, can they come up with a tripartite process that addresses where we are now on those same 3 issues, same thing which we've been talking about? How do we address those things? And what does everybody bring to the table in that regard to deal with it? It can't be dealt with simply an industrial relations negotiation process. It's not going to work. So they might settle this one, and then the government will say, well, okay, we've fulfilled our promise, and so on. So let's match breaks going forward. So I think it has to be dealt with in the context of our broader approach to dealing with our realities.
Well, I think that the culture of government runs counter to the culture needed for tripartism. I found Dr. Rowley gave up on that council, that committee, very quickly. He said at the first difference, walked away. And governments tend to tell you, very frankly, who voted for you. Once they're in office, they are very consultative in opposition, right? They want to talk to everybody in opposition because they're looking for votes. And the minute they're in office, they ask you, who voted for you? And that they take unto themselves the complete right on the basis of voting on one day, and the realities may change, but they believe they have a mandate to do it because they were voted in. And the culture is the colonial culture of autocratic maximum leadership. And it's going to take a lot to build that culture and sustain it.
To change it.
To change the culture from that to one where one side will give the benefit to the other side until you could actually you start from a position of what do we have in common? And if all we have in common is the national interest, well, that's a place to start. But everybody comes in with my interest and it's against what you're fighting from start.
Yeah. I'm getting a signal that we have to
Wrap
move
up.
towards our
Final comments.
closing comments, but I mean, we can, so I know, Suniti, I could perhaps start with you. And in closing, I'm just sort of projecting the thought, budget, it's supposed to improve the lives of, or that is the expectation, that the lives of citizens will be enhanced, or at least not made harder. But we have groups like, we didn't talk a lot about women, especially. We have a lot of female-headed households in Trinidad and Tobago, marginalized groups in some of the communities, fishing, etc., the outlying communities, and also persons who are differently abled. I don't know if in as part of your closing comments, you want to address any of that, what you see, what hope you saw, if any, in the budget for dealing with some of these groups.
I will preface everything I say by Mr. Tanko has a very, very difficult job. And how he tried to deal with it was to share around a set of little money all over the place. He touched all the interest groups. I put a 3 million here, I put that. That's not going to go anywhere. And it was a very transactional budget in the sense that promise delivered, promise delivered, promise delivered. So I think
Made, promise kept.
Promise paid, promise kept, and we're winning. And that was to be able to say when the time comes, we did this, we did that. But you're in the first year. Right? And so that means you can always say your promises delivered, even if things have to change. However, what I would say, all these groups that we're talking about, single parent mothers, differently able, young people, look for your support in community organization and in what is being called the solidarity and social economy. Organize yourself, get together as consumer co-ops, buy in bulk, cut your cost, reduce your cost. Young people, go online, try to understand what you have here. Right. That doesn't cost a lot of money, and you can start by getting somebody interested.
Yeah.
Right? Young Reguelo went and made himself very famous. He went all over the place playing pan.
Yeah.
Right? You get money. You get people. The world is a very sad place for a lot of people in the industrialized world. They're looking for joy. The greatest export thing we have is our capacity to create joy. We know how to throw a fet on a dime, and everybody happy and think is the best thing I gone to. Organize yourself and find ways to earn and to save. Saving is important. You try to get something to invest, but invest it. Don't let save it and put it down, because money is losing value all the time. putting money in the bank just for so is getting the banks rich. They take your money, they lend it, they get a good interest, but you saving getting 0%. Turn it into an investment. Seek out knowledge. Go and ask people what could be a good idea. People want to help people. People want to say, I have a friend who's a lawyer, they might help you. I have a friend who's a financial advisor. Ask, don't be cloistered in your own sense of being adrift. Assume the government is not going to be able to give you. Maybe they can, but assume it and get to work on your own behalf.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. As you move towards your closing comments, I just thought I'd nod you also maybe a couple thoughts on the restarting of the refinery, the energy sector, and even a little bit of what is happening in the sort of Point Lisa's industrial area. We see all these ships with nutrient and etc. So and all of that impacted, of course. Because you spoke earlier about the gas price and the oil price, etc. So where we expected to go with all of that in your part of your closing
comments.
Sure.
I mean, the gas price is one factor, but the even more important than the gas price is the production levels of gas. Yes, the price could be high, but if you're not producing anything, you're not going to get any money. And so while gas production may be stabilized with some of the investment decisions that were made previous to this government, like with BP's SIP and other projects like that. So it might be stabilized, but it's certainly not enough, and which is why Neutron shut down. Well, one of the factors why Neutron shut down. So the issue of where we're going to get gas at the levels that are required to fill out the existing plants in Point Lisa's plus the 3 LNG trains in Atlantic that are still up and running becomes central. And then we come back to where Suniti started, which is the geopolitics, because you're not getting any gas from Venezuela given the current situation, right? But the government of Venezuela said that all the agreements are suspended. In other words, what they meant, not just Dragon is suspended, but Lauren Manatee and Coquina Manikin are also suspended. So even though we have an agreement to produce gas from our side of the border in those 2 cross-border fields, if Venezuela says, no, that is also suspended, we might have trouble doing that. So gas production is going to be a problem. The government may be hoping and banking that there's a regime change in Venezuela very soon, and therefore Ms. Machado, who already said she's selling out everything. She made a statement in a U.S. investment forum that there's $1.7 trillion worth of oil and gas and gold to be had by foreign investors, that therefore that might be back on stream. I don't think that is going to happen, all right? Any military intervention in Venezuela is going to be quite long and messy and may not result in regime change at all. We'll have to see how that goes. So the gas sector is problematic. I think that is problematic. Certainly the restart of the oil refinery will be important. And so we're waiting on the committee that was set up. Apparently the report is going to be due within a few days. And we will see what that committee reports. There's some very good technical people on the committee. Former VP Finance from Petrochin was on the committee. Former VP Refining and Marketing was on that committee. So there are people who have a lot of good technical knowledge of the refinery and so on.
But the minister said to these people that things may not be ready to start until about 3 years from now.
Well, he said a phased start. So
a full start.
Everybody knew you can't start it up right away. It'll take a year to, because you have to inspect every single plant, every single compressor, every single pump, all the pipelines, all the electrics, all electronics, all of that has to be inspected to find out what is the condition. Then we have to be doing repairs, changing out things. All of that takes time, right? And before you push a button to start a single plant. So that whole process may take a year to get 1 or 2 of the plants up and running. And obviously, if they restart, they're going to figure out what are the plants to start first, second, and third, sequencing it, because one plant requires another one to provide the feedstock and that kind of thing. So they'll be looking at those things. But full functioning would take 2 to 3 years. That's what Minister Mulal suggested yesterday. But what that would do, it would result in an immediate injection of foreign exchange because some foreign investor has to come in, some money has to come in from abroad. That money is not available here. You're talking about upwards of 500 million US dollars to get the thing going again. Secondly, it would create a lot of short-term employment. A lot of local contractors would be able to service contractors in the energy sector. So there'll be a lot of economic activity generated as a result of that. But the medium-term thing would start a year and so on down the road. But that's an important project for them to get off the ground. But let's see what the committee recommends. Whether it's what is the feasibility. Well, let's hear what that committee recommends.
Yeah.
That's going to be an important report and will be scrutinized by a lot of people. In the budget statement, there were two things that were announced that were of some interest, right? One was the establishment of Financial Oversight and Appropriations Committee called FOAC to be chaired by the Prime Minister, and the Deputy Chair will be the Minister of Finance. So we have to now see how that works in terms of, in other words, the Prime Minister is putting herself central about how money is going to be spent, and not just the Minister of Finance. And I think that is interesting when you talk about the centralization of decision making and so on. What projects will fly, what won't, what is going to be cut, what will stay. The Prime Minister taking charge of that. So that is one. So it says here, for example, this committee will provide oversight and performance management for the government. It should be, it will have the authority to review, approve, and monitor all major budget items, such as ministerial expenditure, projects, and investment decisions across all ministries at the sole discretion of the Prime Minister. That's what that says. Yes? Now,
maximum leadership too.
Sorry?
Maximum leadership,
But it could also result in huge bottlenecks because everything now, nobody could spend unless the Prime Minister says, go ahead. Yes? So that is going to be, we have to see how that works. And the second one is the establishment of an Economic Resilience Council. So this now is not what had existed under both the partnership and the PNM initially with the Economic Development Advisory Board. So this is going to be chaired by the Minister of Finance, who will retain commercial consultants and so on. And the consultants will work alongside relevant ministry representatives and applicable stakeholders to ensure the execution and proper management of state resources in line with, et cetera, oversee financial evaluation and so on, economic transformation strategies, borrowings, investment, and projects over $50 million. So the question is now, with that revitalization plan, all of those projects over $50 million, is this committee then council going to oversee that? In other words, how is that going to work? So there's some issues there that could perhaps be good or could perhaps be very problematic, and you could perhaps get a lot of conflict between who is responsible for doing what, when. So I just want to flag those two things within the context of we didn't speak about some of the other things in the budget. We are more focusing on some of the fiscal measures and so on. But these two are not fiscal things specifically, but they are governance issues. And the last thing I want to say about governance is my concern about the state boards. We had a session on governance right here, organized by the People's Roundtable some time ago. We discussed the issue of governance. And one of the questions of governance is, and we don't have time to get into that now, but how are state boards appointed? Because I think some horrific decisions have been made with respect to some of the state boards. You've already seen people getting fired. Some people didn't know they get fired. Some people have resigned. And from some critical boards, there's a lack of transparency in those things. We're seeing some major changes going to take place in the two largest banks in the country, Republic and FCB. And we have to make sure that while the banks have, been digging people's eyes out with charges and large interest rate spreads and all kinds of things like that, those things need to be addressed. But we have to make sure that the banking sector is also stable, right? And if things go bad in those two sectors, sorry, the financial sector and the energy sector, then things will become extremely rocky. So how boards get appointed are very important. I don't have time to share what I heard once when I was in the Senate and I was in a meeting accidentally and it was hearing how a chairman will be recommended by the line minister in an energy company. And first somebody said, well, who is that person? I know none of we to do that. No, it wasn't an ethnic thing, because it was an Indo-Trinidadian name that had been recommended by an Indo-Trinidadian line minister, but it was not a UNC person.
Yeah.
But the person who was asking that question didn't even know what the company did.
So I think
So I hope we're
yeah,
not back to that again.
yeah,
So governance is going to be
it's
crucial.
key.
As the country deals with all of the dynamics. And I think, so that is really, it's not even going to be so much the hard economics, it's really going to be the politics of the governance that determines success or failure going forward.
So we have to end here. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I certainly, David and Suniti, I want to thank you all. We have been here before in different topics, and it's always a pleasure to have both of you, and hopefully we look forward to having you again at some other time. I think the topic we were looking at this evening, the impact of the budget on the average citizenry. I think I like where the conversation went, because it wasn't so much just a focus on facts and figures in terms of the fiscal measures, but really trying to see how are youth impacted, how are women impacted, what sectors are impacted, etc. Even some of the ideas Suniti gave about government spending for forex, etc. So I really appreciate the insights shared by both of you. So on behalf of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies and Labor Studies Department, I would like to thank both of you. I'd like to thank, of course, our technical team who have been here with us throughout, and of course, our support staff on this. Yeah, a couple of them you're not seeing, but they have been online tracking, what is happening. So we really appreciate that, and we look forward to having you all again at some point. Thanks also to our listeners, viewers, students who might be tuned in. So do have a pleasant evening, and thanks again all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. You can let us know when we're not live.